Good afternoon to everyone. Good morning here from New York City. I'm Michelle Divone. I'm extremely excited to be moderating this discussion today surrounding the challenges that everyone has been experiencing due to COVID-19. Communities around the world and municipalities have been facing this joint challenge. So the global pandemic has been very much of a local pandemic, and it's forced mayors and local authorities, as you are well aware, to make tough decisions and to really navigate these uncharted waters. So before we begin, please join me in watching this following short video. Which we will hopefully have momentarily. I guess I will give another minute to see if this actually works. If not, we will continue and get back to this in a moment. Thank you for bearing with us. It's, with this new Zoom reality, we've all been dealing with a lot of technical issues. So hopefully we can get this to work. If not, we shall continue. Okay, I think we'll try to get back to that in just a moment. I know that the Israeli Federation of Local Authorities put great effort into this 3-minute video, so hopefully we will be able to see it. But first, let me welcome all of you, welcome our participants. I know you have a very busy schedule, so we really appreciate you joining us this afternoon. With us today, we have Mr. Chaim Bibas, the chairman of the Federation of Local Authorities in Israel. He's also the mayor of Modi'in Maccabim Re'ut. We also have Mr. Greg Fisher, the president of the United States Conference of Mayors and the mayor of Louisville. Good morning to you. Mr. Nick Forbes, a labor politician and leader of Newcastle City Council since 2011. Mr. Ronald Rie, the president of French United Cities and former mayor of Strasbourg. Mr. Marcus Levy, vice president of German Association of Municipalities, Lord Mayor of Münster. So thanks again. Each representative will make a 5-minute presentation. This will be followed by a Q&A at the very end. Again, we know this is time sensitive. I promise you that we will be done on time. And yes, let's get right to it. So our first speaker, Mr. Chaim Bibas, chairman of the Federation of Local Authorities in Israel, mayor of Modi'in Maccabim Re'ut. Chaim, the stage is yours. Good to see you as always.
Good morning, Michal, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for attending this important session. We all over something in common. Each in our house countries is playing a critical role in saving lives, helping citizens, and manage the greatest challenge our generation has known. It's both, it's healthcare and, of course, economy. As mayors and those that represent the mayors in our countries, we are the ones on the front lines. Our government make decision and declaration, but we are the ones implementing everything in the regular situation and, of course, in emergency situation like COVID-19. We are the ones facing the citizens. Since the outbreak of coronavirus, municipalities have never been more important. Success or failure is in our hands, As a result, saving life is also in our hands. This meeting is so important because it gives us, the municipalities, the chance to exchange ideas, brainstorm, and share both our success and our failure in fighting coronavirus and in protecting our citizens, both young and old, keeping them healthy and keeping them employed as much as we can. In Israel, unfortunately, we are still in the middle of this pandemic. Unfortunately, it seems we are witnessing a second outbreak in Israel these days. The municipalities, I do believe in Israel and of course all cities around the world, the municipalities played a major role during this crisis, more than we ever expected. A lot of what was done in Israel was decided on the national level by the Prime Minister and relevant ministers, but the Federation of Local Authorities is the infrastructure and the backbone of the country when it comes to implementation. We provide the services to the 9 million citizens through the 257 municipalities. We help drive some of the decisions regarding getting back to normal, especially in education. We spend most of our time in emergency and crisis management on both national and local levels. We implemented emergency management and crisis communication. Everything was constantly changing and evolving. Our emergency command center in the Federation of Local Authorities in Israel, which was manned 24/7, it's our dedicated municipal emergency crisis application. The Israeli government recently accepted the advice of the special director in charge of corona response to transfer the effort against COVID-19 to a local response. Now, the mayors will be in charge together with the Israel Defense Forces, Armed Command in determining the status of their own municipalities and how best to respond to the virus in their cities, depending on the local needs and restrictions. There are some of the areas in which the Federation's operational tools were deployed. One is education, implementing a plan for remote education. There are more than 2 million students in Israel. Schools and teachers had to pivot, just like startups, and adjust their classroom, their material, and the very way they teach. Two, it's healthcare. Our most important tool was the National Municipal Index in Israel. We could measure where the virus was spreading by city, neighborhood, street, and zip code. Then we will deploy resources where needed. This saved life and prevented further infection. Three, it's Israeli Arab community. We had a big impact here. First, organizing a test center for them, then providing an Arabic hotline for residents to call because a lot of information was not in Arabic, and we helped them with the budget, with everything to stop the coronavirus spreading in their cities. The National Lottery is part of our organization of the Federation of Local Authorities in Israel. We committed 2 million shekels toward coronavirus recovery. It's around $60 million. Food, equipment, medicine, summer school, and helping to hospitals. We were on the front lines with the budget and logistic, of course. 5 is psychological and emotional support. Do not underestimate how important this was, and it was implemented at the local, even personal level. For now, opening school on September 1st is our next big challenge. The Federation of Local Authorities is very busy now to preparing for the start of the school years. There is no reason why we shouldn't start school sometime and in person, despite the calculated risk. Kids need to be in schools. Now, as we look toward the future, we have real challenges. We should keep this forum active. Making a meeting like this are essential for me, and I hope for you as well, to learn, to share knowledge, and to keep improving our services to the cities and to the residents of our countries. I do believe we can share the common things between the cities in Israel, in Europe, in the United States, in every cities around the world, because we have the common things. We deal with the common things, with the education, welfare, with the student, with everything. So I do believe we can share knowledge. We can help each other to prevent and to stop the spread of coronavirus, and try to bring the calm and everything to be as before the COVID-19. So I look forward to hearing from you about your experience. So for now, thank you very much.
Thank you, Chaim. And you mentioned the reopening of schools happening very soon. And this is another commonality that everyone can identify with. If you remember, or probably saw at the beginning of the pandemic, there was an Israeli mother who spoke of the challenges of homeschooling, and that went viral. So just like everyone was dealing with homeschooling, now everyone is dealing with going back to school and reopening the schools. Thank you for that very, very interesting insight. We are going to try to play that video once again. So give us just one more chance of doing that. If it won't work, we will move on. But please, the Federation of Local Authorities 3-minute video, which will beautifully capture what we have all been experiencing.
COVID-19 arrived in Israel in February of 2020. The borders were shut. Events were canceled. Leisure and recreation locations were shut down. And restrictions
audio, but we don't seem
gatherings
to
were
see
put in place.
itself.
The market nearly came to a complete standstill. Hundreds of thousands of
All right. Unfortunately, it is not in the cards for us this time, but we will make sure to improve that for our next meeting. So thanks again, Chaim, for giving us insight into the local authorities' response and what's been happening in Israel as you are now faced with a second wave. I'd like to now introduce and hand the stage over to Mr. Greg Fisher, the President of the United States Conference of Mayors and Mayor of Louisville. Mr. Fisher, I'm extremely interested to see, because as a New Yorker, an Israeli living in New York, I've really experienced this pandemic on the state level. So really interesting to hear what has happened nationally and how everyone is coordinating this effort.
Well, good morning and good afternoon to everybody. I think that's one of the challenges, that the federal coordination in the United States has been sorely lacking. So as a result of that, it's been up to each state to figure out their own strategy. So it's been a real patchwork of solutions over here, and it's been inadequate federal response here in America. So a lot of this has been left up to the mayors. The Conference of Mayors is a bipartisan advocacy organization for America's mayors. There's about 1,400 eligible cities with population over 30,000. We have around 500 members itself within the Conference of Mayors. So we've been calling for federal funding for local governments. Our local government budgets have really been damaged by the COVID-19 pandemic and the accompanying recession, so our tax receipts are way down. We had some relief to cities over 500,000. There's 38 of those in America with the Federal CARES Act funds, but it was not enough, and it didn't go to smaller cities. And then there was also restrictions on how the money can be spent. But right now in the U.S. Senate and the U.S. Congress, they are on recess. They were unable to come to a consensus on a new relief package. So hopefully that will take place sooner rather than later. This week in America, the Democratic Convention is taking place to nominate our next presidential candidate, and then the week after that will be the Republican Convention. So there's some politics going on right now. And then hopefully after that is done, we'll get this next relief package underway. As mayors, our authority really varies depending on the laws of our cities and our states. So as I mentioned, much of the responsibility for the response of COVID-19 rests with the governors. You've seen a very uneven response on that, with some governors being extremely responsible with shutdowns and rules and regulations, and others have kind of let it run. So you've seen a real variety of results in America. You saw the pandemic really explode in New York initially in the March-April timeframe, but now March in the Northeast of the United States have the virus under control, probably the best in the entire country. And then you saw some states like Florida and Texas that were pretty casual about the virus, that in this past month, they've had their cases skyrocket. My city of Louisville in Kentucky, we're on the more responsible side. We were one of the first to go what we called safe at home, and one of the last to come out of that as well. Mayors are managing the on-the-ground response, and we're enforcing compliance of governor's orders via public health teams and first responders. And then we coordinate with hospitals and others in the private sector as it relates to testing in particular. We're leading the testing effort here in our city and the contact tracing as well. Also, we raise money privately to help people that were facing financial hardship because of the pandemic. So we supported households and community nonprofits in that. And then fortunately, my office has a great relationship with the governor. It's Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear, who, as I mentioned, took the crisis seriously from the beginning and issued numerous orders on how to slow the spread. Not all of America has a mandatory mask wearing, face covering mandate, which is probably hard for you all to believe outside of the United States. We certainly do here in our city, in our state as well. So mayors often want to do more than what they can, but they have to fight their governors sometimes. So in the case of Georgia, the Atlanta mayor issued a mask mandate, and the state actually sued them for doing that, but they fortunately later dropped the suit. So this lack of coordination and national strategy has really hurt the U.S.'s efforts and created numerous local challenges, especially when you're cross-border. We're right on the border of Indiana. Kentucky is, the Ohio River is the border, and they have different policies than we do. So it's just been quite difficult here. We're all rising to the occasion the best that we can, but it's just become way too political. And when you mix science and politics, politics tends to win. And unfortunately, that's leading to some disastrous and deadly outcomes. Our schools, our public schools here are starting with 6 weeks of what we call non-traditional instruction, which is internet-based instruction. Some of the private and Catholic schools will be going back to school on a regular basis. And then some of our universities have gone back to school, and then some, like University of North Carolina, just yesterday said, we've got to abandon being back in person because of the way that the virus is spreading. So there's just a lot going on. That's a lot of variability here in our country as a result of the non-federal response to this, which has been very challenging. And amidst all this, obviously, is the election in November for the President of the United States, which will have will have a major significance on how this virus is going to be going forward from here, depending on who wins that election. So that's a little update from United States.
Thank you so much, Greg. I definitely have felt this fragmented response that you mentioned, and can only imagine the challenge. I traveled to out of state. Now I'm not traveling out of state, but I visited Tennessee, I think it was 1 or 2 months back, and they had only mandated the mask requirement, and there were no masks to be found in stores. So just seeing how every area of the United States has everything, like you said, politicized and fragmented in response is really, really interesting. We'll be asking you more about that for sure. Yeah,
a kind choice of words there.
Thank you. Next, we have Mr. Nick Forbes, Labour politician and leader of Newcastle City Council. Since 2011, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everybody, from Newcastle here in the UK. As well as being leader of my city in the northeast of England, I'm also the senior vice chair of our local government association for England and Wales. Let me just describe a couple of things that are going on, and then I'll try and draw some, what I think are some conclusions out of the crisis and where we go next as local government. There's no doubt that in terms of the public health crisis, here in the UK, we're just at the foothills of the second wave. We're starting to see an increase again in the numbers of people testing positive for COVID-19. Thankfully, we haven't yet seen that flow through into an increase in deaths, but sadly, we know that's only a matter of time because of the gestation period and the length of time that it takes people to get seriously ill with the disease. One of our challenges here in the UK, and I guess this is probably common with other places around the world, is that we've got a lot of really confusing messages going on. We've got a government which doesn't give out clear, consistent messaging. That means it's quite difficult for us to hold clear, consistent messaging at a local level. And because the rules on what you can and can't do have changed fairly frequently over a short period of time, frankly, everybody's really quite confused about what they should and shouldn't do at the moment. So one of our jobs at a local level is to just reinforce the really basic messages around good hand washing hygiene, around social distancing, about wearing face coverings, and about social distancing and working from home and avoiding unnecessary travel as much as possible. And we've got here, and I guess, again, this is common with many other places, the kind of tension, if you like, between the public health measures that we know need to be in place alongside the economic measures that we need to see in order to prevent our economy collapsing completely. We've had some real challenges with our government, national government, and some real battles because I think it's the nature of government that at a time of crisis, they want to try to grip and control from the centre. But actually, I don't think that's been very effective. And I can point to 2 or 3 significant examples, like the provision of protective equipment and clothing, the shielding programme, where we provide support to individuals who have to self-isolate in their own home, and the test and trace system, which we've been setting up here in the UK, all of which we've seen pretty big tension between national and local government in terms of who's in the driving seat, who can reach the communities that need to be reached, who can actually make the difference. And when it comes to our economy, we know we've got a real challenge on our hands because for about 3 or 4 months now, what we've been doing is trying to protect as much of our economy as possible. But there's no doubt that the crisis has accelerated a lot of changes that were already underway in our communities. They've accelerated the changes in the way that people shop. So people are now doing much more online shopping rather than visiting neighbourhood or local shopping centres. It's accelerated the way that that changes in travel. So people aren't travelling and commuting so much to work, but are demanding safer walking and cycling routes. And for a long time now, our country has invested mainly in road infrastructure rather than cycling infrastructure. So that's a big challenge for us. And also working patterns are changing. And we're seeing many big organizations which previously allowed working at home as the exception are now actively encouraging their staff to work from home. And that has a big impact on our city centres and our business districts, not just in terms of the footfall through the offices themselves, but also all of the associated businesses that support that office infrastructure, like leisure facilities and shopping, local food shopping and sandwich shops and bars and restaurants. All of those kind of things are all being affected by this. We're seeing this as a real opportunity, though, to accelerate our ambitions towards a lower carbon economy. You know, there's a good saying which is never waste a good crisis. And it's absolutely our intent here, certainly in my city and in many other places in the UK, to try to drive forward that vision of a carbon neutral future based on less traffic, because for the first time in my life in politics, we don't have to get people to imagine what our cities can be like with less traffic, because they've actually experienced it for several months and really enjoyed the experience of cleaner air, less traffic, less air pollution, and less background noise, more wildlife and nature. So there's something about making sure we capture that moment of change. But I think if I can just draw some concluding thoughts from where we are. Firstly, I think we've all got to understand and communicate with our communities that the recovery won't be linear. There'll be times when we make progress, but there'll be times when we have to go backwards as well and go into further measures to try to control the spread of the outbreak. And that's really frustrating for many of our communities, particularly when people just want to get back to normal. But I think for us, and for many places around the world, normal is going to be different from now on. I think it's raised a real issue about the relationship between national and local government, the inability of national governments to really drive the public health and protection measures that we need in a time of crisis like this. And also it's flushed out for us a real issue about the underfunding of local government to be able to deal with this kind of crisis. One of the things that's been very apparent, though, is that it's been the local relationships at a local level between our care providers, our universities, our hospitals, our local medical facilities, our business organizations and our companies that's helped us through. And so I think there's a real lesson for us here, that relationships and the strength of relationships on the ground coordinated at a local level trump organizational structures and boundaries every time. I think there's also a message around the kind of leadership that our places need at the moment. This is not a virus that responds to strongman leadership going out there and fighting. This virus will be beaten through collaboration and cooperation. And that's a very different set of leadership skills than many of the leadership skills that many of our national politicians are demonstrating at the moment. And finally, there's no doubt that we'll only beat this virus if we have continued consent and buy-in and mutual support from our communities. And that goes against a long strand of individualism and the sense of everybody for themselves that Greg was just touching on when he was talking about the issue around face masks, for example. And we've got that debate here in the UK about whether it's appropriate to ask people to wear face masks or not. And the debate is around, actually, I'm an individual, therefore I'm not going to be told what to do. Well, actually, that sense of individual ego needs to be subsumed by the collective sense of responsibility that we have to protect each other. And I think that challenges some of the deep-seated political narratives that we've had here in the UK and in many other places around the world over the last 10 or 20 years or so around a move towards ever-increasing individualism. And I think one of the things that the virus and the crisis has reminded us is that actually we survive as a human race through collaboration and partnership and cooperation. And I hope that's what we're demonstrating in this call this afternoon, that we're sharing our stories from around the world. And actually, although the focus inevitably over the last few months have been on our local places, actually it's really important that we continue to extend the hand of friendship to our international colleagues and make sure that we continue to be a global brotherhood of humanity, looking out for each other and doing our best to protect the vulnerable. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Nick, while you were talking, the only thing I could think and the thoughts crossing my head was how I'm sure everyone on this panel can relate to pretty much everything you said, and how you could have been easily speaking about any other country, because these have all implicated society, from the health concerns, education, to individualism. So it'll be really, really interesting to hear some more thoughts once everyone is done. Thank you so much. Next, we have Mr. Roland Rie, the president of French United Cities and former mayor of Strasbourg. There will also be a simultaneous translator. So if you do not speak French, you are more than welcome to click on the globe at the bottom of your screen, and that will tap you into the simultaneous translation. Without further ado, Mr. Roland Rie, the stage is yours.
Bonjour à toutes et à tous.
Hello, everyone. And particularly, I'd like to greet our friends from Ramat Gan. We have a twin city agreement with them, with Strasbourg, for more than 30 years. I'm very happy to be able to greet them in a very friendly manner. I would like to say that in Strasbourg, we have been in a very difficult situation. It's one of the regions in France which had to sustain the brunt of the COVID-19 crisis with some extremely difficult moments to live for the mayor whom I was. I would like to underline that in principle, I was supposed to leave office last March. I was not represented because I thought that after 37 years of uninterrupted presence on the Strasbourg Municipal Council, 15 years of which were spent as a mayor and the rest as vice mayor, it was time to give the hand to someone else. But the French government, the French state, has wanted the teams already in place to remain in place for an undetermined period. We were in the midst of municipal elections. The first tour took place on the 15th of March, and the second tour was supposed to take place on the 22nd of March. But the situation has become so serious, so dangerous, so grave that we had to delay the second tour by 3 months and to keep in place the mayors who were still in office. It was not easy, but I must say that this must have been a good thing to have mayors with experience, mayors who were already quite well honed in their work rather than have new people dealing with this crisis. There were two things, two lessons that I'm taking retrospectively from that period, now looking back. The first element is the totally unexpected character of this event. We did have a few alerts beforehand, for instance, with the mad cow crisis, if you remember that, some time ago, the Stras. But those crises did not have severe consequences. So I was thinking when we started to speak about and to hear about COVID-19 that probably today we are well equipped, medically speaking, to deal with this pandemic and that we were able to control it like we had with the previous pandemics. And I was wrong. And everyone was wrong on that issue. This pandemic has become and has propagated throughout the globe in a very short period of time, which brings me to a second thought, namely that after this COVID-19 crisis, we can see, or because of this crisis, we are now realizing how fragile our systems are, the fragility of the economy, the fragility of the interpersonal relations, the culture. All of that has come to almost a complete stop in Strasbourg and in the east of France, and even in France overall and in the world. So I think that it is quite clear that we will not be returning. That's my first conclusion that I wanted to bring forward. We will not be returning to the status quo ante, to the previous situation as it was before the crisis started. Those who think that, I think, are mistaken, and because that's impossible, and it's also something that we do not want to have, because the COVID-19 crisis also has some positive elements. For instance, the fact that we are here in a video online conference, whereas in the past, we would have had to travel, take a plane, not to mention the pollution, the carbon footprint, the energy consumption, and so forth. Well, all that shows that there are some positive elements. There are ways to do things differently. The development of teleworking, working from home, has evolved greatly, and that's a positive element. We don't have to be physically at the workplace all the time. It is possible to work remotely. So these are the general ideas. I know now more specifically, because I would like to tell you a little bit about what we did in Strasbourg. The hospitals, the private clinics were almost completely, well, inundated. They were really crashing in the end of the month of March in Strasbourg, specifically in the University Hospital of Strasbourg, which is the largest hospital. We were on the brink of having to choose which patients will be treated and which will not be treated. We had 70 beds, ICU beds. In normal times, we managed to reach 220 beds because of the crisis, but all those beds were filled. And we could not treat any other disease. We were only treating COVID-19. And the chronic patients were just simply, we told them not to come to the hospital. We even had to export some patients to other centers, even ventilated patients. We had special trains which brought them or sent them to Switzerland, to Germany, to Belgium, because without that, we would not have been able to treat all those who needed treatment on the spot. So we were very, very close to reaching that need to actually make that very harsh choice. Things transpired well, thanks to the various social distancing and hand washing and other practices that were developed, the measures that were developed, which we improvised. We were playing and improvising as we went along, because even the scientists were completely baffled. There were some who said one thing, others who said the opposite, and the politicians, and myself included, were, well, what can I say, perplexed. It was very hard to really reach the right decisions. And for this, Cités Unis France, which is the French Federation, really played an important role, thanks also to its international relations. As some have already mentioned, it's very good to have national directives, but it is indispensable in this type of crisis that local communities should help one another and support one another, and be able to guide one another, because we were all in uncharted territories, which was a situation which we were not used to be in. So this was the very important role of Cités Unis France, our federation. And now to conclude, because I'm thinking that I'm just a little bit over my time in this session, we should not consider today that the goal has to be returning backwards, returning to what we had before. We have to rely on the experience that we have acquired in order, first of all, to win the battle against the second wave of COVID-19, which is now arising in France as well, but also we have to adjust and to adapt for the future, because there will be other crises for which we have to be prepared. That is what I wanted to tell you all. This is my testimony, my story about what we did in Strasbourg. But whatever it's worth, the decentralization is very important, and we have to work very in strong communication between the local government and the central government.
Thank you very much. And now, last but not least, we have Mr. Markus Levy, the Vice President of German Association of Municipalities, Lord Mayor of Münster. And I'll also add that I know we are reaching the bottom of the hour, so it seems like we will not have time for questions, as you are all on a very tight schedule, but this has been very fascinating, and hopefully the beginning of many more events of this nature to come. Without further ado, Markus Levy, it's your turn.
Yeah, thank you very much. First of all, thank you for the good idea to organize this panel. This is one of the chances of this crisis, that we in the world come more and more together and are looking for solutions because this COVID-19 crisis. So in Germany, there's a different situation. On the one way, the retail shops are open, the schools are open. We demand that they must wear a mask, and universities are going to open in November this year. On the one side, on the other side, a lot of people are very unworried, and so it is sometimes a problem also for the authorities. And this is a main important thing of communication and of information. Be careful and other things. This is a situation we now have, and so we have an organized and tracing system of the chain of infection. And one of our big luck is, and the colleague from France mentioned about this, we have a very well organized health system. The intensive medical care is unique in the world, and for every 100,000 inhabitants, there are 800 hospital beds and an average of 34 intensive medical beds. In our city, 75. And this is the reason we were able to help other countries like Italy, like Netherlands, and like France. But first of all, I would like to speak about the rule from the City Association. I'm the vice president. It is an association from the big cities in Germany, like the United States City Association, Greg Fisher mentioned to us. And one of the most important things is, while this crisis, and this is a meta part, in this regard, cohesion and solidarity are essential to cope the social and economic consequences of such crisis. This is, I think, one of the most important rules also of the mayor, of the municipality, of the politician in our cities. And our structure in Germany is different to the some other countries. So we have a decentralized German federal system, and so that means that in Germany, epidemic control is executed both first by the national federal authorities as well as by the 16 German states, government between national and municipal levels comparable to regions. This is laid down in the national pandemic plan, and each state has its individual pandemic preparedness plan. Essential, the national federal level has no competences as long as they do not pull the competences from the state level. This highest health authority are at state level, and the local authorities are the lower health authorities with their municipal public health departments. For these reasons, local authorities have special rights when it comes to decisions pertaining immediate danger for the citizens. For example, if a child at a school shows COVID-19 symptoms, the city might close a school without having to wait for the state level to decide on this case. The same applies to big events where local authorities have more competences as regarding safety. This is why some cities decided to apply more conservative measures than those recommended by the state level with regards, for example, to canceling big events in the early stage of the pandemic. So, for example, some cities now try to organize concerts, picnic concerts in a big open area, so not more than 4 people can use a special place, and then he is able to visit a concert or other things. And in our city, for example, it was until today successful. So last weekend we have a concert with 1,000 visitors, and I think this was a very good constitution. But the advocacy role of the Association of the German Cities is that from the advocacy perspective, this means that the Association of German Cities was an integral part of this continuous coordination process representing the interest of its members, municipalities towards the regional states and the national federal levels. So it was a very important issue for us and also for our cities. One of the key messages that the Association of German Cities put forward in this coordination meetings was the need coming from German cities to develop clear guidelines. For example, on how to decide which parents get to give the children into childcare because they work in critical infrastructure, and which parents could not send their children to childcare, and to provide sufficient health supply while still ensuring German municipalities their right to local self-governance. We, as the city leaders, had to create trust in the implementation of local measures against the COVID-19 pandemic and make sure our local citizens felt safe, particularly in such a crisis that was influencing several aspects of the daily life of each citizen. Furthermore, one of the key advocacy tasks of the Association of German Cities has been to make very clear to the state, federal, as well the European level, what needs German municipalities had and still have, as well as the economic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the financial situation of the municipalities. For example, our federal country spent more than 400 billion euros and guarantees from 900 billion euros. It is an unbelievable number. The loss of municipal revenues and additional expenditure have a direct impact on municipal budgets and on the investment capacity of municipalities. This is particularly important for the development of the economy. In addition, municipal companies in the particularly affected economic sectors find themselves in a situation that threatens their very existence. In particular, these include local public transport, culture institutions, and clubs and other things, swimming pools, but also events, sport events, and congress centers, trade fairs, airports, and ports. Another core task of the Association of Cities is to keep its members informed about all matters and developments of importance to local governments. To ensure this flow to information as quickly, this was very important, it was quickly, and as targeted as possible with regards to the COVID-19 pandemic and in order to deal with the special demands to the cities on this matter. The Association of German Cities formed very early on, since March, an internal task force, including colleagues from the departments working in the thematic fields that were most affected by the pandemic situation. Furthermore, the Association of German Cities used its online forum to inform its members about legal and policy developments, measures, and information tools related to the COVID-19 outbreak. Here, cities are also had and still have the possibilities to post directly questions and information in the working group. The working group, the name was Coronavirus, it's impacted on cities. Users can look to specific information by means of thematic subgroups, among other on public health, public schools, public infrastructure, impacts for cities and as employees, childcare, and international relations. So, specifically on the topic of international relations, I would like to stress the importance of international cohesion and solidarity in such a global crisis. We have experienced this at the European level, but also at the international level in form of international exchange of experience among local government associations, as in, I think this panel is an example therefore, and in form of bilateral exchange among municipal partnerships around the world. We are also very much support the announcement of the German presidency of the Council of the European Union to focus on tackling the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. Only together, I think, we were able to master such a global crisis. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Lieve. We do have a few more minutes for questions. So if we can just ask to answer a little more concisely so that everyone can go on with their day in time. We will only go about 5 minutes over, but I will start with you, Mr. Lieve, and I also see some questions from participants or non-participants who are here in the audience. I think one of the major themes is how the local governments are the ones who currently have the public's trust. And we can really see this across the board, here in the United States included. So what do you think we should learn about the role of local government in the future, and how can that be implemented?
I think one of the most important things is to inform the citizen every day I think while the strong time of the crisis, to organize a frame of trust and to reorganize the administration. For example, this is not only a situation of depression. So also in our communication, we have to organize a system after COVID-19. We have to look in the future. We have to organize a discussion culture of trust. And so I think this crisis, like every crisis, has a chance to reorganize our life conditions. And so, for example, this is a chance to reorganize the organization from administration. For example, my experience was that there was a big revolution in digitalization in the economic by the companies and also in our city administration. But I think the most important thing is the most important part of crisis management, to have a strong crisis management on the one side, but on the other side, you use every possibilities to contact the citizen and inhabitants in your city. And if there is a big challenge or there is a threat, speak in an open way to the citizen and use every channels. And so my experience is the people were not happy about the situation, but they get trust in the system of politician and at the administration. And this is one of the most important things. And the next step is, I think in the last time, we often thought we are in a stable world and which out fragilities. And so COVID-19 is a situation that we must have to organize a system of resilience. Resilience is so much important. And first of all, a social resilience in our city. And this one of the most important thing for social resilience is identity. Every people in the city must have to get a chance to get a feeling they are a part of the city. And the city is not a part of rich people and successful people, and on the other side, people on the not in the middle of the city. So this is important. Every people must have a feeling we are part of the city. The owner of the city are all the people. This is so important for the cohesion, and I think for the following processes and for the following decision from the politician to organize a world after COVID-19.
Thank you.
May I come in on specifically on this point and make two very quick comments? Firstly, in the UK, public trust in central government has gone up marginally as a result of the crisis. That's the kind of what in America, I guess you call the rally around the flag concept. But trust in local government has gone up by 35%. And actually, there's something about the more local the politician, the more likely they are to be trusted, because we live and work in our communities, we know them, we use the same facilities. It's not a criticism of national government, it's just a representation of what it's like to live and work in a community that you represent. And I think that's really important, not just for the messaging around the public health crisis that we're facing, but because we know that there are some people who are intent on destroying democracy itself. And actually, I think taking a step back from the immediate crisis, actually being able to demonstrate that elected representative democracy works and people have trust in it is actually a fundamentally important part of making sure that we hold dear to those democratic principles that we all hold very, very close to our hearts. And I think it's a good opportunity for us, not just to use the power of local governments to help our communities get through this crisis, but to reinvigorate that sense that actually the democratic system is the most effective system and that the people that are trying to undermine it shouldn't be given a foothold.
Thank you so much, Nick. I'd actually love to hear Roland Rhee's thoughts on this. Do you think the more local a politician, the more likely to be trusted, as Nick just mentioned? This question is directed at Roland Rhee. You are muted. Sorry, we cannot hear you, unfortunately.
Okay, is it
There we
okay?
are. Yes,
bon?
perfect.
In French, so unfortunately, but oui, je voudrais mettre l'accent effectivement sur.
I'd like to point out also what other colleagues have mentioned here, namely the importance of the role of the local communities in dramatic situations such as the one that we know and that we've known. I think that the state and the international organizations, of course, have a role to play here, but the local communities, the mayors more particularly, are the closest ones to the inhabitants, and they are the ones who have to make the local decisions. Of course, they have to adjust to the national, international regulations, but it all depends on what happens locally. This is what we've been doing for quite a long time at Cités Unis France. And as I said, I'm the president of this federation. We have been doing that in order to work with the people, collaborate with them. We allow them to express themselves. Sometimes this provokes a cacophony. You have divergent opinions. People don't always agree, but this divergence can be constructive. It can help, provided that we create the link between the political authorities and the citizens. That's the most important thing. And the COVID-19 crisis really pushes us in that direction, because it is a question of life and death after all, and we have to be extremely aware and conscious that this situation could reproduce, could happen again, because the world population does not cease growing and people live one next to the other. So we have consequently to have a democracy, a citizenship or citizens' participation. Every person must take their responsibilities and not just toss them onto others. That's what I have been trying to implement in Strasbourg when I was in office. I tried to make the citizens participate as much as possible and not wait for things to come top bottom, but to try to do things bottom up in order to reach a consensus and make the best decisions possible. That's it. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. Last and definitely not least, we have Chaim Bibas. And I'll just say it's been fascinating to hear such commonalities and to see local authorities really exit this crisis, or I don't know if to say exit because we're still in it, so much stronger and more trusted. So Chaim, and I hear some background noise. If you can just mute yourself. Thank you. Chaim. So we know that in Israel you've been facing very, very similar challenges. Again, local authority has really had this pivotal role, and with the Corona Director's appointment, the new director, the government has been passing even more powers to local authorities in how to manage this virus response. So I would like to know from you if the Federation of Local Authorities played a role in convincing the government to give the municipalities more power, and can we expect more of this shift to take place?
Yes, the stance of the Federation was that mayors know their cities and residents best, more than everyone. Therefore, we kept an open and assertive dialogue with the national government in order to implement the traffic light program. I finished a few minutes before this event a meeting with Professor Gamzu, the manager of the coronavirus event in Israel, and the traffic light program, which gives the municipal leader more authority. Until now, all COVID-19 related restrictions were implemented on a governmental level. Now, the traffic light systems that will be operated as the beginning of September will determine the status of each city and town based on the given criteria. cities marked as green will be able to go about their lives with no restrictions. Municipalities marked as yellow will have increased restriction on gathering, event, and the like. And cities marked as red will require an extensive quarantine. If a resident listen to the guidelines and there are less infections, the city status will be improved. If, however, they don't, more restriction will be required. Ultimately, this has been a key victory for the Federation and municipalities, as the routine of the cities and town has been put in the hand of the mayors and the people. If we would like to stop the spreading of coronavirus, we have to give the control to the mayors and municipalities, because we can do everything to be a green cities and not yellow or red. With this in mind, I'm hopeful that the worst is behind us. Only time will tell. We are wiser now, and we have been through stress and difficulty. We have to learn lessons from each other and move toward. The role of local authorities association is critical to providing assistance and strategy to the leaders who work directly with citizens, the mayor, of course. I look forward to continue our joint efforts and discussion, and thank you for joining this important platform to exchange idea. I do believe we can take from all local authorities, from all federation in United Kingdom, in United States, in France, in every places we can take the advantage, and we can promote and through the cities stop the spreading of coronavirus. Next time, let's do it in person, is my suggestion. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Chaim. Next year in Jerusalem, or maybe Dubai now. Thanks so much for that. We are going to try one more time to play the video, so please bear with us. If this doesn't work, we will be sending it to each of you personally. Let's give it one final try before we all part to our separate ways.
COVID-19 arrived in Israel in February of 2020. The borders were shut. Events were canceled. Leisure and recreation locations were shut down. And restrictions on movement and gatherings were put in place. The market nearly came to a complete standstill. Hundreds of thousands of workers were put on vacation without pay. Businesses shuttered their doors, and the number of unemployed skyrocketed. Schools and universities closed. Distance learning began. The Federation of Local Authorities in Israel understood how critical this crisis would become. The Federation created a situation room, emergency hotlines, and a hotline for the Arab sector to explain guidelines. The Situation Room began to send out constant updates and aided the local authorities in managing the outbreak by providing them with information in real time. The local authorities rose to the challenge and began dealing with the new reality. Municipalities worked together to create projects such as safe zones for the elderly, founded a network of volunteers to distribute food and medication, provided over 100 million NIS to strengthen the health infrastructure, and creating corona wards in hospitals together with the National Lottery. Cultural events under restrictions such as balcony concerts, comedy shows, communal prayers, music trucks, and virtual story times were launched by the cities to improve the morale of the residents. Aiding in distance learning, giving tax breaks to businesses affected by the crisis, and providing emotional support to those in need were also offered by the local authorities. In June 2020, the second wave of the pandemic broke out, and with it, marked the enlisting of the local authorities by the national government. Under the guidance of the Federation, thousands of police officers were trained in how to enforce corona guidelines and how to implement the restrictions in local businesses. The Federation, together with the IDF's Home Front Command, began to provide mayors with real-time updates to mayors via the Corona Dashboard Network, which now provides services to over 60 municipalities. In the commerce sector, the local authorities provided additional assistance for businesses in handling fines and taxes, and allowed for local businesses to open their stores on public property to allow for open-air shopping. Furthermore, the Federation provided assistance in expanding the Summer Vacation School project to help parents return to work, while also working with the Ministry of Education to shape the strategy in reopening schools on the 1st of September. Citizens of Israel understand now, more than ever, that the local authorities are here to provide their needs and to be a bridge between them and the national government. Recent polls point to a high level of confidence in the local authorities and their handling of the crisis. Furthermore, the national government's recent decision to transfer more powers to the local authorities, such as education management, indicates a growing confidence in the municipalities from the decision makers in Jerusalem. The transfer of crisis management to the local authorities and the provision of practical tools, authority and flexibility for vital services, allows for the local authorities to track and decipher exact information on infections, gives them the ability to make decisions which are practical for their local residents, and allows for information and guidelines to reach residents more efficiently, further aiding in the effort to combat the pandemic. Under the leadership of the local authorities, we will continue to combat the virus, and we will be able to defeat it. The Federation of Local Authorities in Israel, your home address.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Third time's a charm. If interested, we will still send it to you. Great job in Israel. I'm sure you can relate to our mayors and participants. Thank you so much for joining us this morning or afternoon. For you, I hope that you're leaving empowered. We all have a long road ahead, but it really seems like cooperation and local government is key. So thanks again. Hope we'll do this very soon. And up until then, wishing you all a very safe day and week ahead. Stay healthy. Toda rabah.
Thank you, Michal.